This is how I learned JavaScript. This is really old now, but has 24 hours of content. I'm going to cover about 5 out of the first 8 hours in the next 12 minutes because this is the bit that really teaches you the language. So JavaScript is a client-side scripting language. That means that when a user goes to a website, the web server will send an HTML file back to the user and it will include the JavaScript code. The user could look at this code if they want to. The user's browser then executes the code when it's processing the page. This is in contrast to a server-side language, which will not send the code to the user, but just the output of the code. JavaScript is not Java, so don't get confused by that. Java is a different language. JavaScript has many uses, including form validation, effects on a web page, and interactive content. JavaScript is written inside of an HTML file, so let's make a really simple one. We're going to have the HTML5 doc type, the HTML tags, the head tags, the body tags, and I'll have a title tag. I'm going to save this file as JavaScript tutorial.html. It's important to remember the HTML or HTM file extension. If you're unsure about writing HTML files, you can watch my HTML tutorial. I can then find this file and open it in a web browser. Obviously there's nothing to see yet. You put JavaScript inside of a script tag. You may see in older tutorials people may add a language and a type attribute to this tag, but in HTML5 this is no longer necessary. A really simple thing to do to test that it's working is just to output some text to the browser. So we can write document.write and then open and close brackets, and inside we put some text inside double quotes. So I'm just going to write hello world, and then we end the line with a semicolon, and this creates a statement. So we can see it outputs hello world to the browser. You may not totally understand how this line works yet, but that's okay. We'll start by learning about variables. A variable is an item of data that has a name and a value. In JavaScript, to create a variable, we will use the var keyword and then the name of the variable. And if we put a semicolon now, this will create a variable declaration. If you've programmed in other languages, you might be used to defining a type for each variable, but in JavaScript you don't do that. So at this point, the value of this variable would be undefined. To define it, we can type my variable equals 5, for example. Or we can combine all of this into a single line and say var my variable equals 5. Of course, this could be any number. It could also be a string. Or it could be a Boolean value, so true or false. Commenting code is very good practice. You can do that with a double slash. Comments are used to describe what is happening in the code and they're not executed. Okay, now that we have variables, let's look at operators. These will let us manipulate our variables. First is concatenation. So if I create 2 variables called words and more words and put strings in each one, I can concatenate these, and that means just combine them together into one longer string using the plus sign. So then I can use document.write and output the variable sentence. And we see that this variable has been concatenated with this variable. So now we have a longer one that says this is a sentence. Plus is also used to add numbers, as you'd expect. Document.write takes a string to output to the browser. Even though this is a number, JavaScript will handle the string conversion automatically. So we see that because these are numbers, it'll add them instead of concatenate them and output 8. As well as plus, you can also subtract, you can multiply with an asterisk, you can divide with a forward slash, and you can find the remainder after division with a % sign. These are all binary operators that take 2 operands, this one and this one. There are some unary operators which only take 1 operand. This includes plus plus. Plus plus increments the variable, so this is the same as just adding 1 to it. If you put the plus plus after the variable, it will evaluate the expression, so it'll set total to num1, and then it'll increment the variable. So this will still output 5, but if we take a look at what num1 ends up being, it's been incremented to 6. If you want to do the increment before the evaluation, you put the plus plus before the variable. Then when we output total, we see we get 6. Similarly, you can do minus minus on either side of the variable. Strings are stored as objects. I'm just going to create a string and put some letters in it. So alpha's value is a string, which is stored as an object. You don't need to worry too much about what an object is at this point, except that even though you can't see them, strings have some internal properties, one of which is the length of the string. We can access properties by typing the name of the variable, then a dot, and then the property name, in this case length. So I'm going to create a new variable called length, and its value is going to be the property of alpha, which is also called length. And if I output this variable, it'll say 7 because this string has 7 characters. Strings also have methods that you can call. Now the difference between a property and a method is that a property is just a piece of information. It's a value, it tells you something about the object. A method, on the other hand, can take input, do computation, and then output the answer. One method is substring, and it will just extract a portion of the string. We can call the substring method by typing alpha.substring, and then we give this method some input in brackets afterwards. It takes 2 index values and it will return the portion of the string that lies between those positions. For example, if I give it 3 and 5, it will output DE because D is in position 3, and then it'll output E, which is in position 4, and then it'll stop before it gets to 5. It goes up to but does not include this number. Also note that A is at position 0. So if we output 0 to 5, we'll get A, B, C, D, E. There are of course more properties and methods for string values, but they all work in a very similar way. Next, arrays. Arrays hold many values in a single variable. They're useful when you want to loop through lots of items and do the same thing to each one. There are a few ways to create an array. We can use the new keyword. We want a new array with a capital A, and then in brackets we define the size of the array, so we can say we want an array that will hold 7 items. End the line with a semicolon, as always. This will create the array, and then we can put stuff into the array by using square bracket notation. So we could say at position 0, again it's 0 based just like the characters in a string. We want to put the string cat. At position 1 we want to put dog. At position 2 we want to put the number 95, and we keep doing this up until position 6. This is the last one. Remember, we've got 7 items but we're starting from 0. We could put true. Then we can read the values in the same way. So this should output dog. We get 0 and it will output cat, 6 and it'll output true. Now filling up an array like this might be a bit tedious. Instead you can just do it all here. You can separate your values with commas. So now we just have an array with 4 items. So if we get item at position number 1, remember this is at 1, this is at 0, so it'll output dog. The final way you can create an array is even shorter. You can use square brackets here. And this just is shorthand for writing new array. You can create the array in any way that you want. You get the same result in each case. We're going to take a very quick look at defining your own functions. They're very useful if you have code that you want to reuse. You put in a function and then you just call the functions as many times as you want. First you use the function keyword and then the name you want to give your function, and then we open and close brackets and then open and close curly brackets, and inside just the code that you want the function to execute. So I'm just going to output hello. This could be put in the head section to tidy things up. Then we call the function by typing the name of the function, open close brackets, semicolon. If we wanted to give the function some input, you can add a parameter, so just type a variable name in the brackets. You can have more than one if you separate them with commas. Then you can use this variable inside of the function. When we call the function, we give the variable a value. Finally, we're going to look at some flow control statements. First, an if statement. So an if statement will only execute code if a particular condition is true. For example, if I say a equals 7, and then say if a is greater than 10, execute this code. And the code I'm going to write is alert, and then the value of a. Now alert is a method that gives you a dialog box, and the parameter that it takes is the text to display. So if we refresh the page, nothing will happen because a is not greater than 10. If we made this true though, so a is greater than 10, we get a JavaScript alert with the value of a. We could also test for less than. We could test for greater than or equal to, less than or equal to with a double equals sign, or not equal to with an exclamation mark and then a single equals. So we could use these last two for strings. So a is equal to Jake, so it will output Jake. If I make it not equal, it's case sensitive, it will not output anything. If you want, you can add else after the closing curly bracket, then open and close more curly brackets, and in here have some more code to execute if the condition is not true. The last thing I want to show you is a loop. There are a few loops in JavaScript, but the most useful one is probably a for loop. This will execute a block of code multiple times, so we use the for keyword. Then in brackets, we need a counter variable. Now it's very common to call this variable I and initialize it to 0. You can initialize it to whatever number you want. Then we type a semicolon. The next piece of information we give it is a condition, so we want a loop while I is less than 5, let's say. Then another semicolon, and the last piece of information to give it is something to do after each iteration, so we want to increment I. We can use ++ to add 1 to I each time. Then we open and close curly brackets, just like an if statement. And in here, just to show you what is going to be happening, I'll output something. I'm going to have a string. Then I'm going to concatenate the current value of I. And then I'm going to concatenate the HTML new line tag, because this will just make the output a bit neater. So what this is going to do is create a variable called I and initialize it to 0. Then it'll say, is 0 less than 5? Yes, it is. So it'll do this and output this as iteration 0. Then it will do this bit. This happens at the end. So I will become 1. Then it'll loop and do the same thing again. Is 1 less than 5? Yes, it is. It does this and it'll keep going until it gets to 4. 4 is less than 5. It'll do this. Add 1 to 4. So I equals 5. Is 5 less than 5? No, it's not. So it'll stop and it will continue down here. So we can see it outputs, this is iteration 1, 2, 3, and finally 4. So it does it 5 times in total. If we wanted to go from 1 to 5, we can just change the numbers. So these are the fundamental things in the JavaScript language. Now, unfortunately, just like with any language, I can't teach you everything in 12 minutes. But hopefully this has given you a solid foundation and you can work from here. Thanks for watching.